Now I'm going to request Hellen. He's working in London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. She is going to share his presentation, the role of evidence in nutrition policy making in Ethiopia, institutional structures and issue forming.
So in this work, we've taken an approach from political science to look at multi-sectoral nutrition policy making. We've focused on exploring the institutions that are involved with the issue and also the issue characteristics. So we've looked at the characteristics of nutrition and how to address it. And we've focused on nutrition policy in Ethiopia, looking at how evidence is used to inform policy making and what this political science approach, what it can help us to understand about evidence use in nutrition policy making. So for a brief background, Ethiopia has historically experienced food shortages and acute malnutrition. But the prevalence of overweight and obesity in the country is very low by global standards, although rising in some urban areas. The institutional structures addressing nutrition policy, these have been shaped by drought and famine, and accordingly the policy responses have been focused on emergency food shortages. There has been some progress with addressing malnutrition in recent years, but despite this, many indicators of malnutrition do remain too high. So this work is part of a larger project where we looked at policy making in 6 countries globally, and in each country we interviewed people from health sector organisations, and we asked questions about the use of evidence in the health sector. We asked about institutional mechanisms for evidence uptake, and we asked about the role of evidence in influencing recent health policy decisions. In total in Ethiopia, we interviewed 23 people, and 5 of these people spoke quite a lot about nutrition, and we also reviewed policy documents. So this is what the results are based on. The results, they fit under these 3 key themes. The first one, the framing of nutrition. We found that nutrition policy is still focused on undernutrition, but that this is changing. And some respondents, they spoke about the need to address different types of malnutrition, including overweight. In policy documents, nutrition is often described as a cross-cutting and a multi-sectoral issue, and this was something that the respondents also emphasised. So for example, that the Ministry of Health is the main actor in recent nutrition policy, and the second, we can consider other sectors. The nutrition issue is not only a health issue, it is the concern of other sectors like agriculture, education, water. Actually, 9 sectors are involved in the particular nutrition policy that they were speaking about. Nutrition is a multi-sectoral and a multi-dimensional issue. And we found evidence that this sort of new emphasis is influenced by the global health community, and particularly by the 2008 Lancet Nutrition series, which was actually launched in Ethiopia. So the second finding relates to the different logics that have been developed in different sectors. So different sectors, different institutions have different worldviews, different ways of understanding and making sense of issues like nutrition. So you could say that they've got different logics. Some respondents spoke of the different logics between the health sector and the agricultural sector, for example. So the quotes here, someone said, much agricultural policy nowadays is not nutrition sensitive. Agriculture people contradict some of the messages from nutrition. Sometimes they say just produce more and gain more money, but not to eat. And sometimes they promote only the savings issue, and sometimes they don't promote issues related to the consumption of high fruit and vegetable consumption, especially for young children and for the mother. Someone else said the agriculture mandate is just to increase productivity. They're going to be evaluated by that target and not by nutrition-sensitive issues. Also related, there's the mandate for addressing nutrition. It's often seen as lying with the health sector. But our respondents, they spoke about how this perspective is reinforced by the type of nutrition-related data that are collected and that are used. So if you think there's a sort of like a public health metaphor of upstream interventions and downstream interventions, and if policy interventions can be either upstream and structural interventions or more downstream interventions closer to the individual, nutrition policy often involves downstream interventions, often from the health sector. And our respondents, they suggested that this is partly because the downstream interventions, these are the ones that are easier to generate evidence for, they're easier to measure in terms of policy impact. And the respondents said that it's much more difficult to generate the evidence needed to identify more upstream policy levers for nutrition and to develop the evidence base for doing this. So this might be the type of evidence, for example, that you might get from the agriculture sector, which perhaps resonates with people here. In terms of the remaining gaps in the evidence, the respondents discussed the need for data and evidence showing impacts on more than just health outcomes to achieve policy change. And they often spoke about needing to show the economic impact of interventions. So a couple of quotes. Someone said, the impact of malnutrition, for example, on economic development. You've got to quantify it. You've got to convert the malnutrition impact into money and the money to national development. You've got to convert the impact for malnutrition, for example, on education. If a child is malnourished, the performance for education will be just, you can tell it just like this, is what they were saying. And then the second quote, we get information on the impact of malnutrition across different sectors, on health, on education, on productivity. So the economic impact of malnutrition in the country. And at every advocacy place, we use those data. So the framing and the understanding of nutrition in Ethiopia, it appears to be changing. And it appears that global institutions that have been framing nutrition as this multi-sectoral issue, this has influenced the types of evidence that are considered to be important, including locally. But then evidence also plays an important role in policy considerations. So there's a tension, really, between the need for more structural interventions and the sort of the idea that the downstream interventions, these are the ones that are easier to measure, that are easier to evaluate, and that are much easier to generate the evidence base for. And then there are different institutional norms, values and understandings between the health and the agricultural sectors of how things should work. So this is probably not too dissimilar to a lot of places elsewhere, and Ethiopia does appear to share the challenges of multi-sectoral policy making that other countries face as well.